So dear beloved community, it's absolutely wonderful to be together with everybody again this evening. A warm greeting to each one of you, wherever you might find yourself. Why don't we begin our evening in the same way that we begin most of our evenings, with a few moments of guided sitting meditation. Perhaps we can find ourselves in our posture, just finding ourselves in our bodies, just as they are right here and right now, perhaps inviting a sense of uprightness, a sense of presence, a sense of steadfastness with just how our body is feeling in this moment. Perhaps inviting our spine to move upwards towards the ceiling, rolling our shoulders back and resting our hands in our lap. And as we rest our hands in our lap, closing our eyes gently, and taking a moment to do a body scan, just noticing any areas of our body that feel tight, that feel constricted, any areas that feel open and feel at ease. Not trying to change anything in any way, but simply noticing how things are in this moment. And as we establish ourselves in our posture, let's gently bring our attention to the awareness of the physical sensation of our in-breath and out-breath, wherever we feel it most in our bodies, perhaps the tip of our nose, in our nostrils, the back of our throat, down our windpipe, or our abdomen rising and falling. And without changing our breath in any way, without making our breath different or longer or shorter or faster or slower, we simply bring awareness to this natural process of breathing in just as it is, and the natural process of breathing out just as it is. Breathing in, I'm aware of my in-breath just as it is. Breathing out, I'm aware of my out-breath just as it is. As I continue to be aware of the natural process of my breathing, I become aware of my breath all the way through. As I breathe in, aware of the natural process of the in-breath from the very beginning, that first moment of air touching my nostrils, to that last moment of the in-breath, and that first moment of the out-breath when the abdomen begins to fall and the breath leaves my body, to that very last moment when breath exits my body and mingles with the air. Aware of my in-breath all the way through, aware of my out-breath all the way through. As I continue to breathe, I become aware of my in-breath as a whole body experience. As I breathe out, I become aware of my out-breath as a whole body experience. Breathing in, aware of the whole breath body. Breathing out, aware of the whole breath body. Delighting in the beautiful breath, I breathe in. Delighting in the beautiful breath, I breathe out. Dear beloved community, thank you so much for joining in our practice together this evening. It always brings me a lot of joy and nourishment to practice together with the Sangha. And as I was enjoying sitting meditation, again and again, I was having the sense of the joy of being surrounded by Sangha. Earlier today, we had the second of the in-person days of mindfulness, the very small days of mindfulness that we can host under the current restrictions in New South Wales. So we had a total, including the two brothers that are here in Mountain Spring, we had a total of 9 people here at the monastery. And it was such a delight. One of the friends that was here shared that through their practice in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha and in a number of other Zoom Sanghas over the past few months, they've had the sense that Sangha, while local, is really not local at all, that there might appear to be many different Sanghas, but in fact, we're all really one Sangha. And that was I felt was a beautiful insight to share. It's something that we've definitely been experiencing. It's such a joy and such a nourishment to be able to know that we can connect with practitioners from all over the world each day, and to be able to have as the foundation of our connection this beautiful practice that we've been offered thanks to our teacher and thanks to everybody from the Fourfold Sangha of Plum Village. What a joy. A number of well, before I begin the talk this evening we're going to have the final talk on the 5 hindrances. We're going to be exploring together the hindrance, or as I've been referring to the hindrances, the final joyful and interesting opportunity to practice, which is doubt, skeptical doubt. And after our talk, we're going to have a chance for some questions and responses from a number of Dharma teachers, lay and monastic, who are on the Zoom this evening. So it'll be a really exciting time. Please prepare all of your tricky questions for the wonderful lay Dharma teachers who are joining me this evening. I know they'll look forward to that. So we'll have a chance for that at the end of the short talk this evening. And at the same time as I'm filled with a lot of joy, I'm also aware that within each one of us and around the world at this moment in time, there are pockets of incredible suffering. And our practice is a practice of engaging with what is, of exploring and experimenting with ways to apply our practice and to speak out about situations of injustice. We know that in the United States, in particular at this moment in time, but not only at this moment in time, there's incredible suffering around racial equity and racial justice. And a number of friends from the United States and around the world have asked for my thoughts on this, in this confusing moment, in this painful moment. And so I'd like to offer a few words. I've been really following my breathing today, and I've been recognizing what a privilege it is to breathe. And the 3 words spoken by George Floyd have been very present for me, as I'm sure they are for many of us. I can't breathe, is what he said. So George, my brother, I've been breathing with you. And for all people of color who haven't been able to breathe for a very long time, who've been held down and pinned to the ground by individuals and a broken system, all the time whilst begging to breathe, to just be able to breathe. It's tempting, in fact, it's too tempting to fall into the trap in these difficult situations in which calm, clarity, and compassion are desperately needed, of saying, I breathe for you. And this was the temptation that I had today when I was reflecting on this situation. And since this situation again arose, I had the temptation to say, I breathe for you, and go about my day as normal, with the idea that somehow I was breathing for, or we're breathing for, walking for, or practicing for a person, a group of people, or a situation that's somehow separate or separated from us or from me. But no, George, no, my beloved people of color, my beloved friends of color, this time I do not breathe for you. You don't need me to breathe for you. You don't need us as allies to breathe for you or to speak for you. I choose to breathe with you this time. I choose to walk with you this time. And I promise to do my work. I promise to do my best to help society to do its work so that you can breathe. Because if some of us cannot breathe, then none of us can. I promise to nurture seeds of clarity, compassion, and non-violence so that each and every one of us will have the chance to be safe, including the police officer. Let's make no mistake, he's also a victim. A victim perhaps of fear, perhaps of prejudice, but mainly of the system. Some of us might be wondering why charging a police officer has done little to quell the rage. It seems to me that's because arresting one person without addressing the underlying systemic racism, fear, and privilege for which we're all co-responsible will not solve the issue at all. At most, it will return things to what we've described as normal, which never really was a safe place for a number of us, especially people of color, the members of the LGBTQIA communities, and so many others. The usual normal, when many of us can retreat to our living rooms and ignore the reality faced by people of color and other minorities each and every day. Dear family, I feel we need to have the courage to do our work as individuals, as families, as sanghas, and as society. Until all of us are safe, none of us really is. My beloved sister, Aphrodite Stone, once said to me very soon after Sandra Bland was arrested while driving, you know, Pháp Hai, I used to want my boys to grow up to be doctors or lawyers, Now I just want them to come home at the end of the day alive. So if we can walk out of our house in the morning and not carry the idea that there's a very real possibility that we may not come home that evening, then that's a privilege. If we're in a situation where we can practice being beautiful, being ourselves, and not be afraid of being beaten or killed like so many of our LGBTQIA friends, then that's privilege. No, my brother George Floyd, I do not breathe for you. I do not walk for you this time. I walk with you. I breathe with you, and I promise to do my work sincerely and to invite everybody to do their work. So in this moment, from the bottom of my heart, my request is for each of us to have the courage to look deeply and to respond wholeheartedly with courage, with compassion, and with non-violence. Until all of us are safe, none of us are. In moments like these, I often turn to a book of a collection of essays called Sister Outsider by a wonderful essayist and poet called Audre Lorde. And so I opened her essay called The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action. And I encourage you to read the essay in its entirety. I just wanted to read a couple of excerpts from it this evening because she says what I'd like to say much better than I ever could. The essay itself is quite long, so I've just chosen a couple of excerpts. In becoming forcibly and essentially aware of my mortality and of what I wished and wanted for my life, however short it might be, what I most regretted were my silences. Of what had I ever been afraid? To question or to speak as I believed could have meant pain or death. But we all hurt in so many different ways all the time, and pain will either change or end. Death, on the other hand, is the final silence, and that might be coming quickly now, without regard for whether I had ever spoken what needed to be said, or had only betrayed myself into small silences while I planned someday to speak, or waited for someone else's words. And I began to recognize a source of power within myself that comes from the knowledge that while it is most desirable to not be afraid, learning to put fear into a perspective gave me great strength. I was going to die, if not sooner than later, whether or not I'd ever spoken myself. My silences had not protected me. Your silences will not protect you. But for every real word spoken, for every attempt I'd ever made to speak those truths for which I'm still seeking, I had made contact with others. What are the words you do not yet have? What do you need to say? Perhaps for some of you here today, I'm the face of one of your fears. I am myself, a Black woman warrior poet doing my work. Come to ask you, are you doing yours? And of course I'm afraid, because the transformation of silence into language and action is an act of self-revelation. And that always seems fraught with danger. In the cause of silence, each of us draws the face of their own fear, fear of contempt, fear of censure, or some judgment or recognition or annihilation. But most of all, I think we fear the visibility without which we can truly live. And that visibility, which makes us the most vulnerable, is also the source of our greatest strength. The fact that we are here and I speak these words is an attempt to break that silence and bridge some of those differences between us. For it is not difference which immobilizes us, but silence. And there are so many silences to be broken. So, beloved community, in Buddhism, we speak of the great work. And I want to ask you, when we reflect on Audre Lorde's words, and we also reflect on the great work in Buddhism, what's your great work? What's the great work of transformation, the transformation of heart, through which you're called to bring healing into your own life and healing into the world? In a beautiful teaching on loving kindness, the simile of the saw, which is in the middle length discourses, number 21, we're invited into a practice of loving kindness that is quite interesting. Usually when we practice loving kindness, we think about, or we consider generating loving kindness, first of all, to those that we find dear to us, neutral people, then people we have difficulties with, and so on. In the discourse on the simile of the saw, we're actually invited to cultivate loving kindness as a practice, as a powerful force that we choose to radiate through the lens of a person who might have harmed us deeply, or a situation that we find very painful, that rather than radiating loving kindness to everyone and including that person that's harmed us deeply, or that situation, that part of ourselves that we find very difficult, is the lens through which we radiate loving kindness to the whole world. This is a powerful shift in perspective, a different shift than the way we usually cultivate things, to actually turn towards that which we're afraid of the most, to understand that we have the capacity to be able to transform it. We have the capacity to be able to hold it. And sometimes what we fear most of all is the fact that we actually have that capacity. I remember in the year, I think it was 1999, I was asked to go to the UK to lead a day of mindfulness in the town of Norwich. It was a lovely day of mindfulness that we had in a small community hall. And as part of that day, I led the community out on a walking meditation along the street. It always becomes a bit of a spectacle, as many of you will know, when we have walking meditation out in public. People often wonder what's going on. So as we were walking along the street towards a nearby public park, these two teenage boys were riding along on their bikes. So they took one look at us, and the bikes screeched to a halt. And they were standing with their 2 feet on the road, holding their bikes. Their mouths were agape. And finally, it got too much for one of the young boys, and he called out, "So what's all this in aid of then?" And I thought, this is an amazing question. What's all this in aid of then? This is a question that I've carried in my heart since that time. And it's a question that I ask myself each and every day, many times. What's all this in aid of then? Why am I a practitioner? What am I focusing on? What should I be looking at that I don't want to be looking at? I found it an incredibly important question to be able to hold in my consciousness, to be able to ask over and over again, what's all this in aid of then? The Buddha's answer was that all of this is in aid of understanding the Four Noble Truths, of understanding the operation of the Four Noble Truths in our daily life. Here in Mountain Spring, which is in the mountains outside of Sydney, we've been enjoying a beautiful autumn. It's funny how that happens. I had thought to myself that I would have about 6 to 9 months of summer with the travel plans this year. I'm not a winter person at all. I'm really a summer person. The hotter, the better for me. And so I was thinking to myself, oh, how fantastic, Brother Fapai. You'll have 6 to 9 months of summer. It'll be fantastic. And so I've actually so far had about 6 months of winter, and I'm heading into another 3 months. So it's an interesting practice of flowing with the changes. And we're enjoying a beautiful autumn. The evenings up here are quite crisp, and the days are equally crisp. up here in the mountains, and the leaves have been stunning. Every single day they're different. It's been just like a painting. It's you could sit there the whole day and just watch it. It's absolutely beautiful. We have a number of maple trees all around, and they're stunning. And just a couple of days ago, it rained up here, and many of the leaves were falling to the ground. And I was reflecting on those leaves that were falling to the ground, and I was remembering a time that I was with my teacher in Switzerland, and we were watching a number of the trees that had lost their leaves. And there was one tree that had a branch that still had some leaves on it. And he said, "Look, Brother Fabhai, there's still a branch that's not willing to let go." And so as I was looking at the maple trees here dropping their leaves and all the other trees dropping their leaves as well, I was reflecting on that moment. And it's a little bit like us. The tree has had all of that growth. All of those leaves have manifested out and have been providing it with energy and nourishment throughout the year. And then there comes a certain time in which, in order to have new growth, that tree has to let go of the leaves that it has generated so far. Letting go of those leaves, the ways that all the growth, all of the ways of identifying can be a very scary thing. In some way, for us too, as practitioners, one of the greatest invitations is for us to be willing in some way to let go of how we identify the growth of yesterday, insight, layers of identification, and so on, in order to let new growth in. Those insights of yesterday, they're still there. But as Tay has shared in the 14 mindfulness trainings, we can't just stop there. Truth is found in life, and we need to be ready to learn every day, to continue to grow every day, so that our insight deepens and the new leaves, fresh leaves coming from the nourishment of the old continue to flower, continue to grow. Around Mountain Spring here, we have a beautiful forest. We like to spend a lot of time there. In fact, if you come to Mountain Spring and you don't find myself or Brother Tenzin, chances are we are down in the forest doing sitting meditation near the waterfall, or sitting, drinking tea under the trees. It's really beautiful. In the sutras, we read a discourse called Atko Singha, which again is in the middle length sayings. And I like to call it the sutra on who illuminates the forest. A number of senior disciples decided to go and visit the Venerable Sariputra and listen to a Dharma talk. So they traveled to see Venerable Sariputra, and as Sariputra saw them coming, he said, "This Gosinga forest is delightful. The night is moonlit. The sala trees are all in blossom, and heavenly scents seem to be floating in the air." Doesn't that sound nice? And then Sariputra continued, "What kind of practitioner, friend Ananda, could illuminate this forest?" And so he asked Ananda, and then asked all of the other senior disciples to share what kind of practitioner they thought would be the practitioner that would illuminate the forest. So each of the senior disciples answers the question according to their own tendencies. Everybody thinks that the way they practice is the best way, and that kind of practitioner will illuminate the forest. I love this sutra. Ananda replied, "A practitioner who has learned much remembers what he or she has learned and consolidates what he or she has learned. That kind of practitioner is the one that illuminates the forest." And then Revata, who likes to live alone and to practice meditation, says, "A person who delights in solitary meditation and takes delight in meditation is the practitioner that illuminates the forest." Kasyapa says, "A practitioner who dwells in the forest and praises forest dwelling, that kind of practitioner is the one who illuminates the forest." Moggallana says, Well, here, friend Sariputra, two practitioners engage in a talk on the Dharma and they question each other, and each being questioned by each other, they're able to answer clearly from their own experience. And their talk rolls on and on in accordance with the Dharma. That kind of practitioner will illuminate the forest. Now, funnily enough, as sometimes happens in the sutras, the Buddha happens to be walking by. And the Buddha asks what they're talking about. And so they go through the list again. And every time one of the senior disciples says what they believe is the practitioner will illuminate the forest, the Buddha says, yes, that's exactly right. Now, I imagine the first few senior disciples feeling really happy with that. Like, oh, wow, the Buddha agrees with my viewpoint. But then as they go down the list, it seems like the Buddha is agreeing with everybody. So as they get to the bottom of the list, after they've gone through the senior disciples, and the Buddha's agreed with everybody, then one of the senior disciples decides to ask the Buddha an important question. The disciple says to the Buddha, so what do you think, Lord Buddha, are the qualities that helps a practitioner be someone who illuminates this forest? And the Buddha says, well, everybody's spoken well, each focusing on qualities that they are the best in, that they're the foremost in. For me, my opinion is that I think that someone doesn't necessarily need to be the absolute best at everything, but merely to be wholehearted in what they're doing. And that's enough. I think that's a beautiful teaching from the Buddha. Why don't we enjoy a sound of the bell? We don't necessarily need to be the best at everything. We don't necessarily all need to have exactly the same emphasis in our practice in order to illuminate the forest, but rather by being ourselves, by bringing our whole selves to the practice, by being wholehearted, by really living deeply every moment, even if imperfectly. That's the way to illumine the forest. Sometimes, particularly if we've been long-term practitioners, there can be a tendency to think that our way is the right way, that everybody else needs to practice in our way. And then there can also be an idea too, particularly if we're a Sangha builder, that we create others or Sanghas in our own image, thinking that everybody has the same journey to make. Exactly the same journey to make. And yet we all enter this path with our own strengths and our own tendencies. The Buddha invited us, and Buddhism invites us to practice wholeheartedly, to bring forth the healing that's our own unique healing to bring. It's just like the story that I like to tell of being in France last year during the heat wave, and I was looking for a hat when I was in France, and I saw a very intriguing, very simple hat with an intriguing sign that says one size fits all. So I obtained that hat with a lot of confidence and I put it on, and it didn't fit my head. Now, it could have meant that there's something odd about my head. That's always a possibility. But the Dharma teaching in there is that there is no one size fits all hat. It doesn't work in every situation, just like there's no one size fits all roadmap of the spiritual journey. The map has been laid out by the wise ones, by those who have gone before, by our spiritual teachers. All the landmarks are there. And our job as practitioners is to embark on our journey from wherever we are right now at this moment in time. That's where our path is. The path that leads us back home, to the center of our experience. There's a commonality in insight, but there can be a difference in emphasis. Tonight we have a chance to explore together the final of the 5 hindrances, skeptical doubt, or in Pali it's vicikicca. Now remember that the hindrances are not obstacles to the practice if we handle them and take care of them well. They're actually the opportunities for us to practice, the very grounds upon which we practice. First, in considering doubt, before we actually delve into the realm of skeptical doubt, when I was considering the whole landscape of doubt, it kept coming to me about the three aspects, the three great aspects in Zen practice, and that's great faith or great confidence, great doubt, and great practice. These are the three qualities in Zen Buddhism that we often hear about: great faith, great doubt, and great practice. So the first of these aspects, which all go together, they inter-are, is great faith or great confidence. And we've spoken about confidence in one of the earlier talks. A great poet and practitioner called Ling Yun from the 9th century wrote a very beautiful short poem that says, ever since seeing peach blossoms, I've never doubted again. It's a beautiful little verse. Ever since seeing peach blossoms, I've never been able to doubt again. Faith here, or faith in Buddhism, is not blind faith. Faith in what other people have told us, or what we've heard, or what we've read in books. Faith in Buddhism means confidence born from our own experience of transformation. We see that we've been able to transform some of our suffering, or other people. If we have a deep sense of our own unworthiness, perhaps other people are saying, you know what, you're just a little bit different. You're just reacting a little bit different than you used to. Happiness, it's said in Plum Village, it was said by our teachers, knowing that we're on the right path. And knowing we're on the right path means that when we practice, we see a transformation. And in Plum Village practice, it's one of the maxims of Plum Village that we don't practice for 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years in order to have a fruit at the end of that period. But we practice in such a way that we can touch whatever it is we're looking for, whether it's peace or happiness, right here and right now. To sit in such a way, to walk in such a way, to breathe in such a way that whatever we're looking for is available for us right here and right now. Great faith and great confidence means realizing without any doubt. And this is a hard one. Realizing, accepting, and acknowledging without any doubt that we have a part of ourselves that's intrinsically good and awake and clear. That's a big one. That's a hard one. So many of us have grown up with these lessons and these teachings that we're bad and that we need to be fixed. I'm not going to say that we're not a fixer-upper project. There's some things to look at. But Buddhism starts from the premise that we have this place in ourselves that's intrinsically good. And our practice is about uncovering what's been there all along. So this is one aspect of great faith or confidence, realizing deeply, acknowledging to ourselves fully, without any doubt, that we have a part of ourselves that's intrinsically good, awake, and clear, and so does everybody else. To be able to hold that in our consciousness, so does everybody else. It's also realizing that seeing into our own nature means discovering something that's been there all along, and not something that we need to become. Once I get rid of this, I will become. But being able to touch it just as we are, with whatever's going on. The Chinese character for great, speaking of great faith or great confidence, as opposed to just faith or confidence, the character for great in Chinese, da, or in Vietnamese is dai. It looks like a person who has stretched out both arms and both legs to embrace everything, to break through all the confinement externally and internally. What confines us can be many external factors, for sure, but also internal factors as well. Why don't we enjoy a sound of the bell? The second of the three qualities that go together, if we've spoken about great confidence, the second aspect is great doubt. Does anyone remember the X-Files back from the 90s? In the X-Files, they had that TV series, they had the slogan, "Question everything," which is kind of an aspect of great doubt. But great doubt is not this small little doubt of just running around and being skeptical. Great doubt is not intellectual doubt. Instead, we might want to think of great doubt as always being willing to grow, never thinking that we've gotten to the end where we understand everything, wherever the end might be for us in a particular moment, of being willing to apply the practices again and again. In fact, to begin again and again, over and over again, to be a beginner is in each and every breath, in each and every step, each and every time we encounter the practice is one of the most profound things. I remember being told one time something that I deeply feel is true, that anyone can become a teacher. It's not too difficult, but very few people can become a true student for the whole of their life. To experience each breath as the very first breath we've ever taken, to bring the kind of attention to our step as if it's the very first step we've ever taken, and so on. This is a powerful practice. This is what it means to have a beginner's mind, or to be a lifelong student, to always be discovering just a little bit more, of being willing to apply these practices ourselves and to see the fruits of the practices. In one of the very well-known discourses in the Pali Canon, the Kalama Sutta, the Buddha invites us to practice in this way. The Buddha says, don't go in your spiritual practice. If you're a long-term meditator, don't just go by reports or by legends or by traditions, by scriptures, by logical conjecture, by inference, by probability, or by the thought, our teacher said that. But rather when you know for yourselves from your lived experience that such and such a practice or such and such a teaching has borne fruit, has brought about transformation, then we should embrace it wholeheartedly. But if we know from our experience that something hasn't been beneficial, then we continue to explore it a little more. We perhaps might consider letting it go. The root of confidence, this great confidence we spoke of earlier, naturally brings along with it this great doubt, because with this sense of confidence, this sense of understanding your innate goodness, then from that firm foundation, it's natural that we want to explore a bit more. We want to expand our boundaries. This is how this sense of confidence gives rise to great doubt, not that small, niggling, skeptical doubt, but that willingness to grow. And then the third of the three aspects of the Zen mind is great practice. Great practice in this sense is to see each moment of our life just as it is, not just the moments on the cushion or the moments in the meditation hall, But the moments in which we're in the doctor's office, I know that feeling well, I know that place well. Or we're in the supermarket, or we're in traffic, or we're experiencing pain in our bodies, or we're experiencing loneliness or depression. Each of those moments is our practice place. Each of those moments is a moment to wake up, a moment of practice. Not this sense of let's do our mindfulness, then get up and get on with the rest of our life and have a little check-in with mindfulness every now and again, but rather bringing the spirit of engaging with each moment of our life as a moment to wake up. So in this way, our practice of great practice is to really look deeply and to ask ourselves as practitioners, and many of us are long-term practitioners, what exactly we are practicing and what it is that we need to look into, each of us individually, in order to transform. Very simple questions. Won't take a lot of time. Good luck. So the final hindrance that we're looking into today is skeptical doubt, or vicikiccha. This is basically a lack of conviction or trust. The hindrance of doubt refers to, as a real hindrance, refers to doubt about your ability, doubt about our ability to understand and to put into practice the meditation instructions, and also about our teacher and about the Buddhist teachings in general. So most of all about doubt about our own capacity, and then doubt about whether the meditation instructions work, and about our own teacher. At some deep level, the hindrance of doubt arises when we haven't acknowledged to ourselves that there's no reason at all. There's nothing, no reason at all in which we cannot transform our lives and hearts. Sometimes it takes the bottom falling out of our buckets and that water that was once held in it to spread out all over the earth in order for things to really transform, for us to be able to develop real confidence. I once received a great teaching from one of the young novices in Deer Park, who said to me, you know what, Brother Phapai, I used to have a lot of difficulties until I realized that I've had so many difficulties in my life, but I've come to this moment. And if I look at that thus far, all of the difficulties I've gone through up until now, my success rate is hovering at about 100%. So there's no reason to suspect that I won't be able to overcome the next difficulty. And I thought, wow, this is a great teaching. That's really true. All the difficulties in my own life, I've been able to overcome up until this point. There's no reason to suspect that this time is going to be any different. I've really inscribed that little teaching from that young novice on my heart because it's a powerful one. And I want to offer it to you, that if you're going through a moment that you feel completely lost, you're in pain, you think that you won't be able to overcome, if you consider your life as hard as it may have been or may be at this moment in time, your success rate is hovering at about 100%. There's no reason you will not be able to overcome this difficulty that you're currently facing. No reason to suspect that that's the case. And that understanding gives rise to confidence. Last year, I myself went through an experience in which every single thing that I'd thought about myself or felt about myself or my contribution or my real work and so on was completely shattered. It was an incredibly painful time, a dark time, a time that in which up almost seemed to be down, night was day, left was right, all of these things. But that darkness, rather than being an obstacle, actually felt more like the darkness of a womb. And in a sense, to use the analogy that I used before, the water that I held in the small bucket that I carried up until then, the idea of what my contribution needed to be. the ways that I identified and so on fell right out of the bottom. But in some way, by being authentic and open, I feel in a way that that water has provided the nourishment for some new growth to emerge. And that is true for each one of us. It can take an experience like that to actually break things open. In the commentaries, the hindrance of skeptical doubt is compared to being lost in a desert, not recognizing any landmarks at all. And the suggestion for practice with this tendency to doubt our own capacity, to think that everybody else can be successful in meditation except for me, or that everybody else can understand the teachings or practices except for me, doubting our own capacity, is the willingness to not settle for what other people have told us, but to try out the teachings and practices and to deeply acknowledge to ourselves our capacity, our goodness, our innate goodness, and to recognize, to be ruthless in a sense of directing our attention to recognizing the ways in which we have transformed, the ways in which our view is changing, and to be willing to continue this process of exploration and growth. And this indeed is a great work. So dear beloved community, I do hope that something this evening was helpful, that you found even a sentence from tonight's sharing helpful. This talk this evening concludes our series on the 7 factors of awakening and the 5 hindrances, which we've enjoyed over the past couple of months. In the Compassionate Ocean Sangha Facebook page, we had a poll, and I asked people, I have a lot of things that I'd like to share, but I asked people what they would like to receive teachings on. And there were a number of suggestions, but the ones that got the most votes were the 4 nutriments, and then the Noble Eightfold Path, and so on. So our next series, which will begin next Sunday, will be a series of 4 weeks on the 4 nutriments of life, 1 nutriment each week. And we'll have, in addition to the talks, we'll have some suggested practices, reflection questions, and so on for us to practice at home. So it'll be, although there'll be a talk on a Sunday evening, it's not just a talk, it's a little retreat that you can practice along with at home as well. So I hope that'll be helpful. And just as we conclude this Dharma talk portion of the evening, I just wanted to mention a couple of small things. From Sunday next week, there'll be a couple of changes. As most of you know, the Compassionate Ocean Sangha has been practicing together for every day except Tuesdays when we have a sutra class, every day for the past 9 weeks or so. And so I'm very excited that as of Sunday next week, after that, we'll have some changes. We'll be having a slightly, although we'll be meeting most nights of the week, there'll be a couple of nights in which we won't be meeting officially as a Sangha, but that the Zoom room itself will be available. If anybody just would like to self-organize to meet in the Zoom room, you can at the time, but the Compassionate Ocean Sangha will meet a number of nights a week. And we'll be sharing the facilitation. We'll be having a number of wonderful facilitators from all over the world. Also, additionally, to facilitate this, I'll give you a heads up that as of Sunday next week, the actual Zoom room will change. The meeting room location will change, but please don't worry. You can just go to plumvillage.org/live and click on the link there to be able to enter the Zoom room for the Dharma talk. Although it'll be a new Zoom room, then you can enter the room from that link. and also for the Compassionate Ocean Sangha, for those of you around the world, and many of you do join us, which is absolutely beautiful, for our sitting meditation practices and discussions and so on. You can also use that link that's on the plumvillage.org website. The previous link that you had will not be usable as of next Sunday. Also, if you're joined in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha Facebook group, then the links are, of course, posted every day with a reminder of what's happening. So next Sunday evening, we'll actually be sharing our schedule of meetings in more detail. But now I just want to give you a heads up so that next week you either go to the Facebook group beforehand to click through to the link to the new Zoom room, or you go to plumvillage.org/live to be able to connect into the new Zoom room. So it'll be lovely to be together then. Dear family, I'm so delighted to have a chance to be joined together with wonderful Dharma teachers who practice together in Australia. And we wanted to provide an opportunity for those of you who would like to be able to ask a question. A good question is a question that's directly about your own practice, about your own transformation, your own healing, something very practical. There are many interesting and abstruse things to talk about in Buddhism, but not all of them might be so practical at this moment in time. And so a good question doesn't need to be a long question. A good question can be quite short. And so if you do have a question, we'll enjoy in a moment a sound of the bell. And if you do have a question, then I invite you to take a breath. I will enable the function for you to be able to unmute yourself and to ask your question. And then you can ask your question of the Dharma teachers, and then one of the Dharma teachers will respond to your question. Each of them has a very wonderful practice, and we're looking forward to the insights that they have to share. So why don't we enjoy a sound of the bell before we move into a period of question and responses. So dear beloved community, I've now enabled the unmute function. So if you do have a question, you can bow in, unmute yourself and ask your question. And then we will, after you've finished asking your question, I will mute you again, and then the Dharma teachers will respond. So if you do have a question, please feel welcome and invited.
Good evening, Compassionate Sangha. Well, for me it's 2 a.m, or 3:30 now. My question is, I've been practicing for some years now, but some structure is lacking. When I hear about the stories of the Buddha, I used to give specific instructions and have ways to more scientifically or more accurately notice where your practice is and continue it. And I feel, since I'm practicing mostly by myself, it's hard for me to evaluate and create a direct path. So if there's like a way, like we're in school, to have like a program and certain stages and something helpful in their way to kind of help you kind of aim the way to go back to course, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a very beautiful question. So basically, if we're, how do we practice so that we can know that we're on the right path, if that we're on a correct our course a little bit if need be. Does that summarize your question?
In a way, yes.
Great. Okay. So I'm wondering, let's see, Tony and Jenny, how would you feel about responding to that question?
I need to think about this. It's there, just need. Oh, we're unmuted.
Dear Sangha, dear friends, I think when I think back on when I first started to practice, was a time in my life when I was very anxious, and I'd gone through a relationship breakup. It was quite a difficult time because I felt like I'd sort of lost my sense of who I was in a way. And I began to focus on my breath, the instructions that I was given at the time. But when I came to the Plum Village teachings, what really stuck with me was that there should be joy in the practice. And I remember Thai saying, your practice should be joyful. So I've always tried to use that measure, if you like, that if what I'm doing is not giving me some sense of joy, then I have to question myself whether I'm coming at my practice with the right sort of attitude. And that in a sense, it's not about going through steps or stages. I mean, in one way we develop as a practitioner, but our practice for me is really about, as you were mentioning this evening, is about the joy in how do we practice in a way that this is the moment that's most important for us, not some future moment when we'll get through these stages, but and that takes time to do that. We all go through that process, I think, of thinking that we have to go through stages, and in one sense that is true. I mean, any development is in a sense going through some stages, but I think for me the most important thing was that advice to remember to find joy in the practice in this moment, not in some future moment. Thank you.
Dear Sangha, a lot of thoughts came to my mind as Tony was speaking. One of the things that I have noticed is that there are times in my practice where I feel as though I'm treading water, not moving on, not feeling inspired. And then there's this growth spurt, if you like. It happens with our bodies. And I feel as though it happens with my spiritual practice as well. And it's happening at the moment, and partly because of being able to zoom into Compassionate Sangha every evening and hearing different people's ways of using the Sangha and using the teachings helps me. We all share in those breakout groups and in the larger Sangha groups. People talk about what they've been doing, and sometimes we might feel as though it's not very much, but it can often inspire other people. And so I've been finding that. And the other thing for me, when I first started, when I came to this practice, I came with grief. I had family members who had died. And so having watched particularly my brother and being carer for my brother who died when he was 40, I started to realise how precious life is and wanted to make the most of it and wanted to find more meaning in my life and to get away from the habits that I was in. I still have the habits of some of them anyway, but for me it's about it's intuition. If it feels good, if it feels as though I'm nurturing and nourishing myself, then I know I'm on the right path. And it can be something as simple as going for a walk. I appreciate that I'm able to walk. I had difficulty a few years ago with a problem with my bones and my hip. And I thought I wouldn't be able to walk. And so we're starting to walk for longer periods each day now that we're sort of at home. And even if we can't walk, there's always something in our day that will give us joy. It might be a bird. Pháp has talked about the leaves, the colours of the leaves on the trees in the autumn. And sometimes we just look at them and we think, oh yeah, there they are. But to really look at them and to realise that those trees are giving me air to breathe, and starting to recognise that connection that I have with everything else has also been something that I find very helpful to do. Jenny bowing out.
Thank you so much, Tony and Jenny, for those beautiful responses. Why don't we enjoy a sound of the bell just to allow those beautiful words to sink in before we move on to the next question. So dear family, if you have a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself and to bow in.
Am I being received?
Yes, Gregory, what is your question?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I have a question about meditation process. In my practice of meditation, I get a lot of nice experiences and useful experiences. I do have a problem, and that problem is that I tend to drift off to sleep quite frequently. And of course, that's not meditating. So does anybody have any idea about how to tell during the meditation process you're about to go to sleep and to wake up?
None of us have ever had that issue at all, Gregory. So I don't think you have anything to share. But I think there's a wealth of experience here. Thank you for asking that question. I think you're asking for many people, actually. And so I think that's a very useful and beautiful question to ask. And I'm wondering if Dharma teacher John Barclay would like to respond to this question. How do we deal with a tendency towards sleepfulness or sleepiness in our meditation when we notice we're nodding off to sleep? Any tips or that you found helpful in your own practice, John?
Thank you, Brother Pháp, and thank you for your beautiful talk tonight. In particular, I breathe with you. I think I'm going to remember that for a long time. And thanks, Greg, for your question. There was a lady in one of our sanghas who had been practicing for quite a while, and we were having a discussion one evening, and she shared that she was never able to find joy in her breathing. And that sort of shocked me a little bit. But I realized that that this lady had been practicing for a long time, but maybe wasn't able to find joy in just being with her breath. So I know for me that there's a little bit of investigation here involved. initially. When we breathe in, and this is the beginning of the previous question as well, which is the Buddha's scientific instruction on things. What is the structure in our practice? And if you notice that we always start a session here in Compassionate Ocean with meditation, coming back to our breathing. If you ever listen to a talk by Thich Nhat Hanh, he always begins talking about the simple practice of breathing. And the same is true with the Buddha's teaching. He came back and began, and remember that when the Buddha taught, he was teaching to, most of the people he was teaching to were not literate. And so he just came back to the simple practice of coming back to your breath and being aware of that function of your body that's breathing, to be aware of what a miracle that is. And if you can be in touch with that every time, and how your breathing can calm you, how useful it is when we're agitated, when we have anger, to use our breathing to embrace those difficult feelings, even doubt, to recognize those feelings clearly. So there's an appreciation of breathing that, and when we have that appreciation, it's like a gratitude or a joy is born from that discovery or the deeper understanding of breathing. So, Greg, I know you think about your meditation practice very well and deeply, but to just come back and to experience your breath and have an appreciation for it, I think that is the entry point into the deeper teachings that then, say, Brother Pháp Hai or Thich Nhat Hanh or even the Buddha eventually takes us to, and is the start of our practice all the time. And we never stop with the breath. So we never stop that practice of coming back to our breath. And in that way, maybe we can experience the joy of breathing. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, John, for that beautiful answer. So many people come to the monasteries and they say after a couple of days, my God, I'm so exhausted. You also, I just can't handle it. You'll have such a busy schedule and things. And I often wonder why that is. We're actually pretty lazy people. We walk, we sit, we breathe. We're not really doing anything nearly as involved as the schedule that people have at home. But what I feel also, in addition, like I've observed with people that come to the monasteries, is that there are these layers of accumulated tiredness as well that we can have. And that when we're in a space where we can completely relax body and mind, that often there are, barring any other physical things or illnesses and things that can be going on, there can be those layers of accumulated tiredness. And so this is important to be aware of as well, this layers of exhaustion that have built up over time. And so oftentimes I say to people, if they say to me that they're exhausted in the monastery, I say, take a lazy day, just completely rest and everything. And then when you have had like a really deep and long sleep and everything, then when you come back, don't turn on your mobile phone, don't do anything like that. Just really dwell in each activity and dwell in a sense of restfulness. And like John said, creating that sense of joy and that sense of interest around our meditation object is a really important thing. And I've shared earlier about with mindfulness, if mindfulness is applied correctly, then it always gives rise to this sense of curiosity, this sense of exploration. And if there's something that's interesting, something that's engaging, something that we look forward to, wow, we have so much more energy. if we treat our meditation object, our breath or whatever, as a dearly beloved friend, then it becomes interesting, just like the latest TV show or something. We always have enough energy to be able to watch those things, but to sit and follow our breathing can seem like a boring thing. But can we engage that sense of curiosity, that sense of interest? That would be an amazing thing to do. I do want to mention one thing. There was a question in the chat just before we circle back and see if there are any final questions. There was a chat, I think, that was a really important question. And that was from Mari, who said, how can I be truly thankful to my body and to my life after 6 years of illness, mostly spent in bed? Yeah, Mari, my heart goes out to you. This is not an easy situation at all. And as somebody who has a chronic illness, I know just how lonely it is, particularly if it's an illness that doesn't have a cure. If it's an illness that has a trajectory that may not seem like it's a very positive trajectory. When I was diagnosed a number of years back, I remember the doctor saying to me, well, you have a couple of good years and then things are going to decline. You better get things in order and, really think seriously, because you're going to be very limited. You'll probably be in a wheelchair, all these kind of things. You have to have monthly transfusions, all these kind of things. And so I took that on board, and I really, read all the literature that was given to me, listened to all the dire talks, and I do my best to follow all the advice. But I realized that at a certain point, I'd gotten into a mindset of the what ifs rather than the what is. I realized that for me, because of the diagnosis that I had, and the dire nature of it, was basically any small infection and things like that, basically that could be it, or living in and out of infusion clinics and all these kind of situations, and also having to get used to a new normal, and things that before were quite easy became quite challenging, sometimes going through periods where it was almost impossible to walk, sometimes going through periods where it's difficult to even put a sentence together, believe it or not. All the ways that I felt were the ways in which I wanted to be able to respond to the Dharma and to be able to serve were no longer possible for me. And it was a very difficult time a number of years back. And so I had to make a number of decisions. I realized that for me, what was important was to be able to change my focus from what I couldn't do anymore to what was possible right now, to be able to also pay attention to the difference between paying attention to the sensations in my body and how they were, rather than the stories that I was telling myself about them and the fear-based mindset that would come on. And also for me, I began to look at my physical situation as a teacher, and I began to look at the kind of teachings that I was receiving, rather than seeing it as an obstacle that I had to get rid of in order to be healed, to be able to acknowledge to myself that at this moment in time, there is no cure. And so healing for me was not about getting rid of the physical symptoms, but was something else entirely. And just as I shared earlier in the Dharma talk, for me, that very thing that I was most afraid of, that thing that took away all of the ways that I was identifying myself, all of the ways I thought that I could be of service and things like that, was the very healing that I needed. In many ways, it has become the greatest teacher of my life. Without becoming a professional patient, In fact, on my chart in UCSD, it has non-compliant patient written on there, which I'm quite proud of, actually. But because I've decided that I will enjoy my life on my terms, and people can tell me all of the things that they told me, but I will come back to my own experience. And so far, I'm not in a wheelchair. So far, I've had 100% success rate. And I'm also okay if and when that time comes, because I'm choosing to live each moment fully, and to not so much get caught up in frustrations with comparing what I used to be able to do in the past, but to be able to enjoy what I can do now. And it's become a great teacher, because I realized that for many years of my life, I didn't know where to put my energy. I had so many things that I wanted to do, and I was doing so many things here and there, that in a lot of ways, my energy was being dissipated. And in some strange way, this situation, as difficult and as painful as it is, it was actually the teacher that I needed to humble me in some way, and to be able to help me to know what was most important to do, and to let go of the things that were not important. And so for me, I've reoriented myself a lot from just doing things to focusing more on connection, focusing on coming back to my body, focusing on engaging with love and with what is. So it's been a great thing. I wouldn't wish it on anybody else, but I'm grateful in a sense that it's come into my life. Doesn't make getting through the day any easier. There are some moments at which I feel I can't take another step. But those are the moments in which I realized that the other thing that was very difficult for me, and I think in general is difficult for a lot of men in particular, but also for a lot of us in general, is to ask for and receive help, to actually share what's really going on, and to be able to receive help rather than to just say, I'm fine, and to battle through. And in Australia in particular, that's what we honor. We honor the little Aussie battler. And I realized that the great teaching in this is that actually we should present ourselves, or for me, it was a wonderful thing to present a sense of vulnerability sometimes, and to be able to receive. So my heart goes out to you, Mari, and for me, I definitely will be sending you energy, and I thank you for your question. So dear beloved community, we are at 9 p.m. There's always so many wonderful questions and so little time. We might have to have one evening where we just have a question and answer session. I think that'd be wonderful. We have so many wonderful Dharma teachers who are here with such a wealth of experience. And so if you'd like that, we'll definitely make it possible in a few weeks to be able to have one session of question and answer. But for now, dear noble community, we hope that this evening's been enjoyable for you, has been a rich evening for you, and that you found something that will give you inspiration on your path of practice. It's certainly been a delight to be together with each of you. So we'd like to end our evening with the same way we like to end our evenings with the Compassionate Ocean Sangha, with our Sangha worldwide, by coming back to our body, by coming back to our breathing, and to just take a moment to think of persons or situations or parts of ourselves that could use a little of this energy of presence, this energy of peace at this moment in time. And as we hear a sound of the bell, just dedicating the energy of our evening's practice for each of those people or situations, places on earth, or parts of our own heart.